On a rainy day, the storm only worsened over time. A trap was already set to attract any animal there. Xiaosu is hidden, ready to pull the trap's rope, but he laments his bad luck as no prey has yet appeared, while the acid rain only worsens by the moment. He begins to worry, knowing that if no prey appears, he and his brother Lu Yuan will likely starve to death. Xiaosu thinks that absolutely any prey would do, even a small bird. At that moment, Xiaosu hears a bird noise above. He looks up and thinks that a bird is indeed heading his way. The bird calmly flies through the sky. Suddenly, the bird sees Xiaosu on the ground and decides to change its course to attack him. Xiaosu is surprised, as he did not expect the bird to do this. The huge bird attacks Xiaosu with its sharp fangs, but he manages to dodge just in time. Xiaosu, when dodging, jumps toward his trap. He disarms the trap and grabs a pot pan to use as a weapon. The bird, without wasting time, changes its direction again, and once more heads towards Xiaosu. Xiaosu is worried seeing the enormous speed with which the bird was attacking him. He attacks the bird with the pan while the bird defends itself using its huge claws. Xiaosu manages to land a full blow on the bird, throwing it far away. He takes advantage of the bird being motionless for a few seconds on the ground and jumps on it, grabbing it by the neck with one hand and pressing it against the ground to prevent it from escaping. Still holding with one hand, Xiaosu breaks the bird's neck, killing it instantly. Xiaosu feels somewhat relieved, as he had been waiting all night for some prey, and he finally got his prize. Xiaosu begins to walk back to the village, saying that it is still early, but he needs to leave immediately for the Pharaoh market to sell the bird. He is hoping to exchange it for food for several days. As he walks, Xiaosu stops upon feeling a strange sensation in his body. He then bends down, feeling great pain, and wonders how on earth he started feeling ill at such a time. With his eyes closed, feeling pain, he thinks that in the past, this malaise only appeared at midnight, but lately, it has been happening much earlier. Xiaosu begins to feel even more pain, gritting his teeth. He just lies down while the sensation continues. Xiaosu imagines that this type of situation became much more frequent after he had escaped from a pack of wolves. Moreover, everyone in town keeps saying that it is just a passing pain, but Xiaosu realizes that this headache is different from ordinary pains. He feels as if he is going to another dimension. That sensation was not of pain, but of pure chaos. Xiaosu feels as if he is falling endlessly from somewhere, and realizes that this sensation is a bit different from the sensations he felt in the past. He opens his eyes and looks at his hand, noticing that this time he is fully conscious. Looking forward, he notices a strong light. Xiaosu puts his hand in front of his face, shielding himself from the light and wondering what it was. In front of his hand, he realizes that he is in a kind of palace. He looks forward and sees a black fog blocking his vision. The fog gradually dissipates until he has a clear view of what is in front of him, noting that there are two huge doors. Xiaosu pushes the doors to see what is inside the hall. He notices that it is a huge hall with massive pillars and several bubbles floating. He holds his sword while scouting the place. He approaches a table with several cabinets beside it and wonders where that place is, of which he has no idea what it is. He starts walking in the palace to better understand where he was. He notices a table and wonders what is on it. He barely asks himself this and begins to feel strong headaches again. The storm is still very strong. A bald man is hidden behind the tree. The man looks ahead and sees Xiaosu lying on the ground next to the huge bird. At this moment, Xiaosu wakes up, thinking that this time he woke up much faster than the other times. He lifts part of his body, thinking it started to rain harder while he was unconscious. He then begins to get up, while the bald man draws his sword to attack him. The bald man then runs towards him, demanding that he hand over the bird in his hands. Xiaosu looks back and attacks the bald man with his pot, the blow so precise that it knocks out a tooth from the bald man. Xiaosu heads back to the village, while the bald man sits on the ground, lamenting without understanding why he ended up being the victim of his potential prey. The bald man wonders what that child has been through, since he is clearly strong. Xiaosu, walking a bit, encounters a system screen in front of him, stating that Xiaosu's mission is to give to another person what he took. Xiaosu looks at that screen in front of him and is puzzled by what is happening. He then turns and looks at the bald man sitting on the ground. The bald man appears to be on the ground crying. Xiaosu approaches him with a grim expression, which even frightens the bald man. Xiaosu then takes his bird and asks the bald man if he wants it for himself. The bald man, crying and confused, says he does want it. Xiaosu hands the bird to the bald man, who can't believe it. The bald man this time cries, but out of happiness at seeing that beautiful bird for himself. Xiaosu looks at his system screen, seeing that the mission was completed. A sheet of paper flies into that palace where Xiaosu was, heading towards a typewriter. The sheet enters the typewriter and types that the mission was completed. As a reward, he will receive a skill duplication scroll. He will now be able to use it to learn someone else's skill. Xiaosu closes his eyes while thinking about this skill duplication scroll. He reflects on what it might be, as it seems to be something like copying the skills of other people, something like hunting, survival, or other types of skills. The bald man, still crying, puts his hand on Xiaosu, thanking him, and even saying that he is a great person for having given him that bird. Xiaosu looks at the bald man and then takes the bird from his hand, saying that he will not give him anything. The bald man is in shock, not understanding what happened there. Xiaosu continues his journey while the bald man just watches him leave. The bald man is completely indignant, saying that the world is upside down since there is no longer anyone decent around. The rain begins to stop a bit, and the sun emerges. Xiaosu continues his journey back to the village. He looks at the sky and feels relieved that the rain has stopped a bit. He is already a bit sweaty from walking so much even though it was raining. He then sees the village gates. He crosses the gates to finally take the bird to sell. Xiaosu keeps walking while he sees various stalls along the way. He also sees several people watching him. Those people begin to stare at him with a serious look. Xiaosu just continues his way without changing his expression. One of the men who was watching comments to a bald man that apparently that child had a good hunt that day. Xiaosu looks sideways at people gossiping about him. He already puts his hand on his dagger in case of any trouble. One of the men starts to move towards Xiaosu. Xiaosu keeps watching this person come close and is already preparing to defend himself. This man is full of confidence that he will get something, until he is stopped by the hand of another person. The man then turns and sees that the bald man stopped him, saying to forget it and not to mess with that kid. Xiaosu continues his way while the men leave quiet what they were going to do. The men comment to not mess with Xiaosu because he has a brain disease. Xiaosu heads towards another huge gate. He proceeds peacefully on his way this time without being bothered by anyone. He finally arrives at the stall he was looking for. Upon entering the stall, he throws the bird onto the glass and asks how much it is worth. The owner, who is doing some accounting, stands up and goes to the counter where Xiaosu threw the bird and asks him to be careful with it. The owner explains that the glass is very expensive, so he shouldn't be throwing things like that. Xiaosu looks stressed with that unnecessary fuss. Xiaosu takes the opportunity to look at some of the merchandise there. The seller then weighs the bird to determine how much he will offer for it. The seller then smiles and tells Xiaosu he will give 3 kotties and 6 taels for the bird and asks if he accepts. Xiaosu looks angry while watching the seller calculate on his abacus. The seller explains that the market is very good that day and that birds are 200 yuan per kati, which would make it 700. Xiaosu replies that it's too little. The seller then looks serious, recalculates on his abacus, and says he will increase it to 800. The seller explains that indeed there is a shortage of meat within the barrier, but like it or not, everything has a price and rules need to be followed. Xiaosu grabs the abacus the seller was using to calculate and says that winter will soon arrive and things will get worse, as there have recently been almost no birds around. Then Xiaosu demands 900, no more, no less. The seller shakes his head, saying that it was not possible. Xiaosu just picks up his bird and starts to leave the store. The seller shouts in desperation, asking where he is going. Xiaosu simply replies that he will ask the stall next door about the price again. The seller, afraid of losing that bird, which would be a great investment, calls Xiaosu back and asks how much he wants to sell it for. Xiaosu just asks to let him leave and inquires about the price with someone else. The seller, already worried, asks if he hadn't said he wanted 900. Then he is willing to pay the 900 yuan. With this, he will not delay the tuition payments for his brother Lu Yuan's classes, said the seller. He says this concerned and also thinks that someone from the fortress management announced that people like Xiaosu would go out of the barrier to hunt exotic animals that day. And this news was not disclosed just to him, so clearly other sellers would love to buy that bird. Xiaosu asks, what was it that he said again? The seller replies that it was about not delaying the tuition. Xiaosu says he doesn't mean that. He wants to know about the phrase he said before that. The seller, already trembling, says it was, how much do you want to sell this bird for? Xiaosu, with a funny face, replies that he will sell it for 1200 yuan. The seller is outraged to hear that absurd amount, but is provoked by Xiaosu, who says if he doesn't pay that amount, he will sell it to the stall next door. The owner of the establishment starts to count the money he has saved, counting from 1,196 up to 1,198. He begins to sweat coldly, seeing that it was all he had. The seller grabs the money and throws it into Xiaosu's hand, saying that was all he has. Xiaosu accepts, saying the seller can owe him the 2 yuan that were missing. The seller just cries as all his savings were just for that bird. Xiaosu looks up and notices a jacket for sale. He asks the seller how much the padded jacket hanging there costs. The seller looks up to see which jacket it was. The seller picks up the jacket and asks if it would be for personal use. It was costing 490 yuan. He still comments that he does not make much profit on that padded jacket. Xiaosu responds that it was not for him, since he doesn't feel cold. Xiaosu looks at the items on the shelf and asks how much the anti-inflammatories cost. The seller replies that a pill costs 210 yuan. He also says that if he takes the medicine for 3 days, he'll do it for 620 yuan and will also throw in an antiseptic. Xiaosu, looking at his wound, asks to leave it be, since inflammations are quite rare during winter. The seller hands the padded jacket to Xiaosu while asking him that during his hunts, if he comes across another bird, not to kill it. There are many nobles within the barrier who would like to raise them. Xiaosu replies that it's okay, but he will have to charge much more if he needs to bring those birds alive. Xiaosu then returns to his cabin. He arrives and immediately opens the curtain to enter. Inside, he sees his brother working on an assignment in his notebook. Lu Yuan is happy to see that his brother has finally returned from the hunt. Xiaosu approaches his brother and asks how his schoolwork is going. Lu Yuan replies that it is going well, but truthfully he would rather be hunting with his brother than sitting in school listening to Mr. Tang teach. Liu Yuan takes the opportunity to ask when he will be able to hunt with his brother. Xiaosu gets serious and says that hunting is no joke, that a person can die at any moment during a hunt, so he needs to take advantage of being young to learn things like physics, chemistry, mathematics, and other subjects in school. After all that is more peaceful than hunting. Xiaosu also explains to his brother that knowledge is the most important thing in the current world. He also asks his brother to reflect on their city, and that no matter what happens, no one would target a teacher just for him to realize how important a teacher is. Xiaosu begins to stand up while thinking that it's a pity school tuition is so expensive, otherwise he would like to attend too. Standing up, Xiaosu says that before selling the bird, he saved some giblets, and he will make a soup with them. Lu Yuan notices a wound on his brother's arm and asks what happened. Xiaosu starts cooking while replying that it's just a scratch, and he doesn't need to worry. The soup is ready quickly. Xiaosu takes a small plate, puts some of the soup on it, and hands it to his brother, telling him to eat the giblets. His brother refuses the food, asking Xiaosu to eat since he needs to nourish himself to heal those wounds. Xiaosu asks him not to worry since he's not hungry, he will just drink a little of the soup. Lu Yuan, with tears in his eyes, says he won't eat it, and that the injury is not just any scratch. Lu Yuan also says that he heard days ago that a person in their village died from an infected wound. Xiaosu slams the plate on the table asking why Lu Yuan is crying. Xiaosu also explains to Liu Yuan that he knows very well that they cannot cry in that world. After all, the world does not believe in tears. Xiaosu, angry, points outside asking his brother to look at the people around and says that if he doesn't eat well and someone invades their tent wanting to stab them both, what should Xiaosu do? Xiaosu also explains that he sent his brother to school precisely because he has special abilities, and that as long as he studies hard, he won't need to go outside the barrier to hunt and make money from it. He will be able to earn money inside without any danger. Lu Yuan sits where the soup was. Still with tears in his eyes, he begins to eat his soup after hearing that sermon. Xiaosu puts his hand on his brother's head and says that Lu Yuan is usually mischievous when they are outside, but when they are at home, he behaves differently. Xiaosu also asks him to eat quickly, and when he is full, to try on the padded jacket that Xiaosu bought for him. Lu Yuan turns to his brother and asks where his jacket is. Xiaosu, with a smile on his face, says he doesn't care about jackets. They then ate all the soup until there was almost none left in the pot. Xiaosu lies down a bit to rest while thinking about the palace he saw today during his fainting spell. He continues with his eyes closed until he opens them, feeling a strange sensation. He looks from one side to the other and realizes that he is again in that strange other dimension that resembles a palace. He crosses the door to enter the huge hall and starts to take a closer look at the things inside. Xiaosu decides to test something and raises his hand for it. He realizes that he can't touch anything, as if everything were an illusion, and starts to think that all this is just in his head. He begins walking towards the typewriter. He sees a sheet of paper on the table and decides to pick it up. The sheet states that the mission is to give to someone else what he took, and that the reward for doing so would be the skill duplication scroll. The scroll could be used to learn someone else's skill. He realizes that this refers to the mission he completed earlier when he encountered the bald man trying to steal the bird. Xiaosu then notices the typewriter, and on the keys are written some things such as just, optimistic, honest, true, friendly, kind. Xiaosu finds this strange and wonders if the machine is saying that he should be a good person in a world where there is no ethics at all. Xiaosu, looking at the whole place, imagines that he would never do that. At that very moment, a woman starts walking towards the brothers' tent. She opens the tent with her hand and decides to enter without saying anything. However, at that moment, she is stopped with a dagger at her neck by Lu Yuan. The woman looks terrified at the dagger at her neck. Lu Yuan realizes it's their sister Xiao Yu and asks what she is doing there. She takes a deep breath after having a dagger at her neck and asks why Lu Yuan hasn't slept yet. He just looks sideways without answering anything. Xiao Yu, concerned about his silence, asks how brother Xiaosu is doing. She had heard rumors that he was injured, so she decided to come visit him. Lin Yuan puts away his dagger and replies that his brother was injured by a bird, and that's why he is hurt. She becomes worried as she looks ahead and sees Xiaosu lying down resting. She keeps her head down, not knowing what to say. Lu Yuan then sits down and tells her that she is 8 years older than Xiaosu, so she doesn't need to worry about him. She becomes completely embarrassed and says that Lu Yuan is cheeky for saying that, especially since she considers both of them as her younger brothers. She then sits down a bit after yelling that. Lu Yuan just looks to the side without saying anything to her. Xiao Yu asks to let it go. She says she will leave and only asks Lu Yuan to tell his brother when he wakes up that she came to see if he is all right. Lu Yuan replies that it's okay, he will tell him that. She then heads towards the exit of the tent and goes on her way back to her house. Lu Yuan decides to get up from the table and goes to the tent door and sits there. He grabs his dagger and keeps watch over the tent while his brother sleeps. At that moment, he looks back and hears Xiaosu ask him not to be so hard on sister Xiao Yu in the future, because things are not easy for her either. Xiaosu was sitting on his bed. Lu Yuan replies that he thinks she is somewhat indecent since he saw her smoking 2 days ago. He also explains that cigarettes are something that the barrier industry sends out of the city, so for her to have accessed them, she probably got them from some wild one. He still says that she only stays so close because she knows that Xiaosu does very well in the hunts. Xiaosu becomes serious listening to all this and asks his brother who exactly is decent in there. He then stands up saying that if a person wants to live in that world, then they cannot be a decent person. Unfortunately, life forces them to be that way. Xiaosu just asks him to stay away and stop provoking her. His brother just replies that he understands and will not do it anymore. Xiaosu sits next to his brother while Liu Yuan asks if he wasn't sleeping, and why is he awake instead of resting. Xiaosu, sitting looking at the moon, replies that he is just lying down thinking about some things. He also explains that maybe he has some ability too. Liu Yuan asks if he is serious. Xiaosu replies that yes, but he needs to try it out first to be sure of that. Xiaosu continues looking at the starry sky and starts to imagine a hunt with his brother. In that hunt, the two were lying hidden, and Xiaosu begins to think that in that city, some people have special abilities. In this particular hunt, his brother Lu Yuan was just praying to hit the target. Suddenly the target is hit and falls in front of them for no apparent reason. This ability of his brother is called luck. Xiaosu begins to think that, although this ability is interesting, it also has a side effect. After making a wish, his brother will suffer some minor illness. In the midst of his imaginings, Xiaosu is interrupted by his brother, who asks him to look at the sky and see the shooting stars. The two watch the starry sky, and several shooting stars passing through the sky. Xiaosu, concerned about this, asks his brother not to go making random wishes, as something bad might happen if he does so. Lu Yuan asks him to calm down, as he already knows this. Lu Yuan takes the opportunity to ask his brother why shooting stars appear and then disappear so quickly. And what if someone who wanted to make a wish couldn't, because it disappeared so quickly? Xiaosu, not quite sure what to answer, just says that they move so fast precisely because they don't want to listen to people's wishes. He wonders if that answer sufficed. The next day at the city school, the teacher is giving a lesson saying that the topic will be about science and technology of the civilized era. The teacher, holding a book in his hand, asks his students if they know what technology means. Lu Yuan, yawning, says he has no idea what that is, and the other students in the room laugh at this response. The stressed teacher asks everyone to be quiet, since they don't know the answer. Xiaosu is hanging in the classroom window trying to listen to the lesson, while the teacher says he will explain what technology is to everyone present. The teacher begins to read his book, while Xiaosu is hanging outside listening secretly. The teacher suddenly closes his book and says he will end the class for now, and that everyone should go home to eat. The teacher glances sideways and sees that there is no one now at the window. Xiaosu is crouching and notices that someone is coming towards him. It's the teacher saying that from now on, Xiaosu can stand at the door, but he is not allowed to enter the classroom. Xiaosu crouches down and thanks the teacher for letting him watch, even if just standing at the door. Xiaosu raises his head and thanks again, since he really wanted to attend the classes. After that, the teacher is preparing a soup. He takes some in a plate and starts to cool the food since it was very hot. Xiaosu then approaches and offers a cigarette, thanking once again the teacher for all his generosity in letting him attend his classes. The teacher accepts the cigarette, saying that he really wanted one. Xiaosu is happy to say that, thanks to the teacher's generosity, he will not need to pay those expensive tuitions and can still learn about the lesson. The teacher lights a match and uses it to light the cigarette already in his mouth. The teacher then begins to smoke a little during his break. He takes the opportunity to tell Xiaosu that in the problematic world of today, it is quite rare to find students like him, who really like to listen to the classes, and takes the opportunity to ask why Xiaosu likes the classes so much. Xiaosu thinks, and replies that probably because knowledge is never too much. Especially because in the chaotic world of today, a teacher is the most respected person in the city. He also gives the example of the vegetables planted at the school by the teacher, and says that no one in the city would dare steal them, since the owner is the teacher, and asks if he understood what he meant. The teacher tries to laugh but ends up coughing because of the strong cigarette. Xiaosu takes the opportunity and says that there is something he has always wanted to ask. The teacher asks what it would be. Xiaosu begins to imagine an advanced civilization and says that as the teacher was talking about the existence of ancient technologies before the catastrophe happened, and asks why they no longer exist. The teacher, still smoking his cigarette, answers that it is because of the broken generation. He continues, explaining that in the current period, which is extremely chaotic, surviving day after day is the highest priority. So how could he still think about learning something? Xiaosu simply responds that it is always possible to store new information. The teacher closes his eyes and admits that he is right. He then looks up at the wall and says that such information is in the hands of very few people inside it. Xiaosu then looks at the barrier and asks if, in that case, shouldn't they just tear down the barrier? He also says that many beasts do not dare to actively attack the crowd as long as everyone stays together. He explains that even without the existence of the barrier, the wolves would not dare to act rashly. Xiaosu says that, besides all this, there is a lot of science and technology outside the barrier to be discovered if the barrier were broken, so he asks if it wouldn't be interesting to do that in order to be able to rebuild civilization. The teacher, still smoking, listens to everything Xiaosu says and replies that as long as the danger outside the barrier exists, there will always be refugees who have no choice but to enter the barrier and depend on the fortress to make a living. He explains that this way, the fortress gains more large and cheap labor, and the investments behind the barriers will never let the wall fall. The teacher, back to teaching, also takes the opportunity to ask his students why groups with personal interests living behind the wall would give up a fortress that guarantees them class superiority. The teacher also asks them never to think that danger is far away from them. For now, they have their parents to protect them, but when the children grow up, they will have to learn to protect themselves. The students are focused on the lesson, while the teacher says that next, they will talk about what to do if they encounter a wolf in the forest. All the students seem interested in the topic. The teacher points to a person and asks him to say what to do when encountering a pack of wolves. Xiaosu asks if he should answer, since it seems he was pointing at him. Xiaosu begins to think about it and replies that if one encounters a pack in the forest, the person should try to choose higher ground. The teacher is interested in the explanation, while Xiaosu says to pick a high ground, where the field of view is broader, the air fresher, and the view beautiful. Xiaosu smiles and makes a thumbs-up gesture, saying they should do this because it is the most suitable place for an auspicious burial. The teacher is completely frustrated with that ending to the answer, asking why on earth he would say that. Everyone falls silent in the classroom after he gave that whole explanation. Xiaosu feels awkward, wondering why the mission wasn't completed. After all, there was nothing wrong with the knowledge he passed on. The teacher gives a slight cough as a sign that Xiaosu should navigate the situation. Xiaosu thinks, imagining what he could answer, and begins to explain that probably the teacher there has seen a wolf outside the walls, and whether it's a lone wolf or a complete pack, the outcome would still be the same. They would have to choose where they want to be buried. The teacher remained silent, though he found that answer interesting. The teacher then asks Xiaosu to sit in the next classes, and that now Xiaosu will also be responsible for teaching survival lessons to all students from now on. Xiaosu is taken aback, now being responsible for teaching something. He just thanks without knowing what to respond. At this moment, the system screen notifies that the mission was completed and that his reward will be a point of strength. Xiaosu feels strange, as his body was really changing. He looks at his hand and feels that he really gained muscle strength after the system notification. He holds his arm and starts to think that apparently that palace is not something fanciful. It seems he really provided a unique ability for Xiaosu. Xiaosu begins to think that the strength of an adult man is 3 points, and currently, Xiaosu was at 2.5 points. So if he gained 1 point now and his previous value was 2.5 points, then now he has moved to 3.5 points of strength. He changes his gaze, imagining that now he probably surpassed the strength of a normal adult. Xiaosu smiled, imagining that his chances of survival had significantly increased when he ventured into the wilderness. At that moment, his brother Liu Yuan called his attention, asking why he was daydreaming. Liu Yuan remarked that Professor Zhang had allowed Xiaosu to attend school to listen to lectures, and even planned to make Xiaosu a substitute hunting teacher. Seizing the moment, Liu Yuan inquired if Professor Zhang intended to make his brother his successor. Xiaosu paused, then replied that it probably wasn't the case. Perhaps Zhang just wanted to earn some extra cigarettes. Liu Yuan's expression changed, asking if he was serious. Xiaosu grinned, telling Liu Yuan he didn't mind being a temporary teacher, and added that when he finally became a professor, he would pass the position to him. As Xiaosu began walking, he remarked that in the end, he could leave the wilderness, but the wilderness never really left him. Liu Yuan clenched his teeth, thinking his brother always gave him the better things, keeping the worst for himself. He thought this while Xiaosu was saying it was good to be a teacher, but it wasn't really his style. Xiaosu also told Liu Yuan that he needed to study hard to become a wise knight in the future, and asked if he understood everything. Realizing he hadn't heard anything, Xiaosu turned around and asked if his brother had understood him. He noticed his brother was far away, so he hadn't heard anything. Xiaosu just asked what he was doing so far away. Liu Yuan approached his brother as he smiled. The two continued walking near the tents. At that moment, several armed mercenaries passed by them. One of the soldiers began stretching, saying he just wanted a few days off and wondered which kind of Jingshan he would go to. Xiaosu, observing them, wondered if they were really mercenaries. Another mercenary commented that they didn't know the way, so they should first go to Wang Fugui to ask if he knew someone who could show them the way. Listening to this conversation, Xiaosu began to doubt if they were really heading to Jingshan. He imagined that the mercenaries inside the barrier lacked real combat experience, so sending them outside the barrier was akin to sentencing them all to death. Xiaosu continued on his way and passed by a hooded girl. He looked back to see if he had seen correctly. Still looking at the mercenary, he remarked that she looked much like a beast in the jungle from afar. Liu Yuan, who had also heard the mercenary's conversation, asked his brother if he thought Wang Fugui would recommend him to be their guide. After all, everyone in the village knew that Xiaosu was well acquainted with the jungle. Xiaosu replied that in the Jingshan area, one could only enter vertically and exit laterally. He himself would not want to enter such a place. Xiaosu also noted that the mercenaries were somewhat strange, so it was best to avoid them. Night then fell, and both brothers were nearing home. Xiaosu opened the curtain to enter the house. Liu Yuan saw that his brother's wound had not healed, and asked how it was. Was it still very painful? Xiaosu smiled and said it was great, almost completely healed, in fact. Liu Yuan got angry and shouted at him not to lie, since other times he could barely stand when he returned injured like that. Xiaosu entered the house and told his brother not to worry about it. After all, he wouldn't let anything kill him that easily. Liu Yuan just listened in silence. The mercenaries were near the brothers' house, and one of them asked if it was true that Xiaosu really could survive attacks from a pack of wolves. Someone replied that yes, there was no reason to lie about it. Xiaosu and Liu Yuan realized there were people outside who were even talking about Xiaosu. The brothers crouched down and grabbed their daggers in case they needed to fight. They started to sneak around inside the house and went to the door to see who was outside. They saw the merchant Fugi talking with one of the mercenaries. The mercenary asked Fugi what he meant by the phrase, "Is there something wrong with his head?" Fugi replied that it was nothing, just an unfortunate comment. He then noted that Xiaosu's house was just ahead. Xiaosu, watching from the door, was dismayed that Fugi had actually said those things about him to the mercenaries. Everyone arrived in front of Xiaosu's house. Fugi shouted for Xiaosu to come out as he had visitors. The brothers worried about the situation, and then Liu Yuan asked what they should do. Xiaosu responded that he would go outside, but told his brother to stay inside and do nothing. Xiaosu, with his pan on his back, opened his curtain and stepped out to greet the people. Xiaosu, with his clown instincts, ran up to Fugi, took his hands and congratulated him, saying that the father and son were well, and the baby weighed 3 kilograms. Everyone around was completely confused by what just happened. The mercenary asked what the heck he meant by father and son are well, as shouldn't it be mother and son are well? The mercenary, completely annoyed, began to shout about what kind of nonsense this was, asking if everyone there had a problem. It made no sense. The mercenary grabbed Fugi by the shirt, outraged, asking how he dared to say that this guy was not troubled. He is completely crazy with that nonsensical talk. The mercenary, still yelling, asked if he understood the consequences of lying to them. The mercenaries left angrily, while Fugi shouted for them to wait, saying that although Xiaosu has a brain condition, it's not what they think. Fugi, now crying, turned to Xiaosu, saying that he had sentenced him to death. Xiaosu began to whistle as if he knew nothing about it. Fugi ran towards the mercenaries asking for another chance. The mercenary told Fugi he would give him until dawn to find another suitable candidate, but asked him not to interfere. Fugi, worried, said it was easier said than done. The woman among the candidates paused for a moment. She then looked back sternly. After looking at Xiaosu, she continued walking. Xiaosu began to worry about that woman whom he had no idea who she was. Suddenly, the system notified that one of the target's abilities was randomly copied. Xiaosu, confused, asked what the heck was copied since he hadn't done anything. The system informed that the firearm skill had been randomly copied and asked if Xiaosu would like to learn it. Xiaosu, still puzzled, thought he wanted to see about it. The system opened a huge screen for Xiaosu, informing about things like knowledge of firearms, firearm maintenance, periodic maintenance, maintenance precautions, among other things. Xiaosu watched those various screens about firearms and began to imagine that all this was related to the skills in handling a firearm. He began to wonder if he really could copy other people's abilities. Xiaosu closed his eyes, and the system notified that the skill was successfully learned. Now, Xiaosu mastered advanced firearms proficiency. Xiaosu, though surprised, was confused since he had obtained a basic skill duplication scroll, and from what he understood, he had just learned advanced firearms proficiency. The system informed that there are 2 types of skill duplication scrolls. The first type is basic, which can be used to learn basic and advanced skills. The second type is the master skill duplication scroll, which can be used to learn master-level skills, ensuring that Xiaosu learns the advanced level of that skill. There is also a chance to copy a target's superpower. Xiaosu was amazed by this information, seeing that he could even copy people's superpowers. He wondered if this almost made him invincible. Xiaosu asked the system about the level of the firearms skill of the girl who was with the mercenaries. The system informed that her skill level was perfect. Xiaosu was surprised that the girl had such a high level of proficiency and wondered why someone so powerful was mixed up with a group like that. He guessed she must have gotten into some trouble to end up there. Suddenly, Xiaosu's head began to hurt. At that moment, he heard his brother calling him. Xiaosu turned around and his brother asked why he was staring so much at that girl's butt. Xiaosu, completely bewildered, asked if he was stupid for saying that. Just then, someone emerged from another tent asking, "But? Whose? Where?" It was Xiao Yu, who was concerned after hearing that odd conversation. Xiaosu couldn't believe seeing her and asked why she was there. Xiao Yu replied that she had swapped places with a family of 3 who lived in the tent next door, so officially she was their new neighbor having moved close to the brother's tent. Lu Yuan asked Xiaosu to crouch down and whispered in his ear, asking if he was still a virgin. However, it was odd that Xiao Yu had done that since it seemed like a waste of money, given she lived in a brick house. Xiaosu, infuriated by the virgin talk, grabbed Lu Yuan's head and shouted that it looked like he was at that age, so it was time they had to talk about sex. Lu Yuan taunted, saying it was fine, and if Xiaosu had any questions about the topic, he could just ask him. Embarrassed, Xiaosu said goodbye to Sister Xiao Yu and took his brother inside the house. After entering, Xiaosu told his brother that he really had guts to bring up that topic, but advised him to do his best not to provoke Sister Xiao Yu and not to try playing matchmaker for them. After saying this, Xiaosu spotted something that wasn't inside their house before. His brother pointed under the chair, saying there were 2 hidden potatoes and 3 anti-inflammatory pills there. Lu Yuan, still looking under the table, asked if those things were for Xiaosu's injured arm. Xiaosu picked up the items and realized they were indeed anti-inflammatories. Looking at them, he asked Liu Yuan if he remembered that last year Xiaosu was injured when he encountered a wolf pack. Someone secretly gave them pills to keep them alive. And looking at the pills, he said that the place where this person put the medicine was exactly the same place they were put this time too. Xiaosu said he had been looking for that person for a long time. Liu Yuan commented that it was probably Xiao Yu who put the medicine there, since he had only mentioned the injury to her. Xiaosu pondered whether that was really the case. At that moment, they heard something outside the tent. A man was bothering Sister Xiao Yu, telling her that he found out she had moved to that place when he came to visit her, and that he even had a cigarette for her. Worried, she replied that she no longer did that kind of service. The brothers were concerned upon hearing the argument, while the man laughed, asking if she no longer did that type of service, then who would bring her cigarettes in the future? Xiaosu gripped his dagger, fearing the worst. The man began to tear Xiao Yu's clothes while she screamed for him to let her go. Xiaosu ran out of his tent. At that moment, the system notified that the current mission was to help her. Xiaosu witnessed the assault right before him. He thought that whether it was a mission or not, he would help her anyway. Xiaosu grabbed his knife and ran towards the aggressor. The man saw Xiaosu coming and laughed, thinking that kid really believed he could cut anything with a bone knife. The man in the tank top drew his metal sword, claiming his weapon was superior to Xiaosu's. Without a second thought, Xiaosu attacked the aggressor, breaking his weapon in half despite it being made of metal. The man in the tank top was alarmed, unable to believe that a bone weapon could break one of metal. Xiaosu then dropped his own knife, grabbed the aggressor's hand, and pummeled his stomach with punches. He then flipped the man over, grabbed his head, and slammed it hard into the ground, cracking part of the floor. The aggressor, trembling with pain, began to wonder how old this kid was and why he was so strong. After immobilizing the aggressor, Xiaosu asked Sister Xiao Yu who this guy was. Still frightened, she replied that he was a foreman at the coal mine and also part of the group that led people who stabbed someone to death the night before. Apparently, he had heard that the man had a habit of keeping money, so the thug started to get ideas because he had gambling debts. Xiaosu examined the aggressor closely. He then picked up a piece of the broken blade and prepared to do the worst, while the aggressor worried about what he was going to do with that piece of the sword. At that moment, a system notification arrived stating that the mission now was to release the enemy. Xiaosu then slashed the aggressor's belly, making him scream in pain. The aggressor writhed in agony from the cut to his stomach. Xiaosu merely stated that he had at most 3 minutes. He emphasized that if the aggressor could make it to the clinic within the next 3 minutes, perhaps he might somehow survive. The aggressor, in great pain, quickly got up and ran, bleeding profusely towards the clinic. A notification arrived stating that both missions were completed, and the reward for both was a scroll of basic skills. Additionally, the system informed that due to the loss of his weapon, a secondary mission had been activated. Xiaosu was confused by all this, thinking that even though he wounded the aggressor, the mission was still completed. So what criteria does that palace use to decide if something can or cannot be? Liu Yuan was worried, asking his brother if it was right to let that person flee like that. After all, he's not a good person, so if he gets stitched up at the clinic and recovers, he'll probably want revenge later. Xiaosu laughed and said it seemed like anyone in that crappy clinic knew how to stitch at all. Relieved, Liu Yuan said that seeing his brother's merciless way, he could now sleep peacefully. Joining in the joke, Xiaosu said that despite being very handsome, nothing would happen between the two of them. Xiao Yu, observing all this, found it very strange. Xiao Yu joined in the banter, also saying that she only sees him as a younger brother. Xiaosu began to laugh awkwardly, saying all this was very strange. He then grabbed his brother's head and said all this was his fault for talking such nonsense. Xiao Yu smiled, watching the brothers' interaction. At that moment, Xiaosu realized he was being transported back to the palace again. The palace was quite dark this time. He looked towards the table where the typewriter was. The typewriter began typing on its own until a sheet came out notifying that the secondary mission had been activated. Xiaosu smiled, saying that a secondary mission at that moment would be quite interesting. He then took the sheet from the typewriter to learn more about this mission. He realized that the mission revolved around him having lost his weapon. So it seemed the mission had something to do with a weapon. Xiaosu thought it would be great if he could indeed get a weapon. He read in detail what the mission entailed. And essentially, the mission was for him to collect 100 sincere gratitudes to unlock a new weapon. In addition, he would be able to use the gratitude to exchange for items. After reading all this, he found the secondary mission very strange. He began to wonder about needing to collect gratitudes, and they had to be sincere. He noticed a new sheet coming out of the typewriter. He read that he had just received a point for Xiao Yu's sincere gratitude, and that now 99 gratitudes were left to unlock the weapon. He realized that the palace's judgment was indeed accurate. His devilish self began to wish he could collect negative emotions as well, as he could easily provoke all the villagers who disliked him, and thus quickly reach the maximum level. Xiaosu lay down while his brother sat near the table. Suddenly, Xiaosu jumped up and asked his brother to thank him quickly. Lu Yuan, concerned, asked him not to do such things suddenly as it was frightening him. Xiaosu, with a demonic expression, rushed towards Lu Yuan asking what exactly he was scared of, and insisted that he give gratitude immediately. With his head bowed, Lu Yuan thanked his brother for taking care of him all this time. The system then notified that Xiaosu had earned another point for Lu Yuan's gratitude. Xiaosu was pleased, thinking it would be harder to accumulate these points. Xiaosu leaned on the table and asked his brother to thank him a bit more so he could earn easy points. Lu Yuan, confused, said, "Thank you," once again. This time, Xiaosu noticed that he did not receive any notification from the system indicating he had earned another point, and found it strange that he received nothing at that moment. He then pointed a finger at his brother and said he was not being sincere enough. He added that apparently his emotions weren't right, and asked Lu Yuan to thank him again. This time, Lu Yuan responded with a "thanks," and without receiving any notification from the system, Xiaosu said it still wasn't right, and that his brother needed to let his emotions flow naturally. Again, Lu Yuan thanked him, and once more Xiaosu responded that it was not done correctly. Xiaosu now said this was the right expression to make, and asked his brother to try again. Lu Yuan was crying, not knowing how else to thank him since nothing worked. Lu Yuan was exhausted, and asked Xiaosu if this was his ability, because it seemed to be a very problematic skill. Xiaosu was sad because the whole night had passed, and he had only managed to receive one sincere gratitude. He now stood in the palace, racking his brain about what to do about this. At that moment, 2 coins fell onto the table. He went to the coins and looked up, puzzled about where they had come from. He picked up one of the coins and wondered if it was really a coin. He flipped the coin and noticed a message engraved on it saying, "A grateful heart. Grateful to you for accompanying me in life and giving me the courage to be myself. A grateful heart. Grateful for destiny. While flowers bloom and wilt, I remain reverent." Xiaosu read all this without understanding what it meant, and noticed that a melody had started playing in the background. He looked to see where the sound was coming from. He was startled to see that there was a jukebox playing music right behind him. He approached it, wondering what that machine was for. He noticed that the machine had a slot. Looking at the slot, he imagined he would insert a coin to test and see what happens. Xiaosu took one of the coins and placed it in the machine to see what would happen. At that moment, a small black pot fell from within the machine. He picked up the pot and saw it was labeled medicine. He looked at the pot and thought it would at least be helpful to know for which disease the medicine would serve, since just having the name medicine didn't help much. Suddenly, he felt his body shake as if he was being expelled from that place. Before he knew it, he was back in his tent. Lu Yuan was surprised to see this, asking if he had become a magician by chance. Since out of nowhere, Xiaosu made a bottle appear in his hand. Xiaosu decided to open the bottle while wondering if the medicine was something universal, since it only had the name medicine on it. He then took out a kind of black slime from inside the bottle, saying he would try it to see what happens. Xiaosu brought the black slime close to his deep cut. He then carefully applied it all over his cut, completely covering it with the black slime. He was a bit worried, thinking if it was reckless to apply it without knowing what it was. After all, it could be poison or something similar. However, he was surprised that it didn't hurt at all. Pleased with the outcome, Xiaosu thought about how a common anti-inflammatory medicine needs to be taken for 3 consecutive days, and each use costs 200 yuan. In contrast, this ointment was effective with just 1 application, making the bottle extremely valuable for its efficacy, potentially worth millions. Xiaosu was determined to gather gratitudes as quickly as possible. The next day arrived and the children were heading to the classroom. Xiaosu also made his way to the school. The teacher noticed the appearance of the two. They looked like the walking dead, clearly having not slept a wink all night. Lu Yuan began to say that his brother, but he was interrupted by Xiaosu, who claimed nothing happened. They just had trouble sleeping that night. The teacher understood the situation, but asked Xiaosu if he had thought about what he would teach that day, since it would be his first day as a substitute teacher. Xiaosu asked him not to worry, affirming he had thought about it. Xiaosu began to walk to the front of the classroom, pondering how to collect gratitude from all those students, though he had no idea how. He simply asked everyone to stand up. All the students stood up and greeted him good afternoon. Xiaosu thought this was incredible, as it seemed he was on the right track. He then started talking to the students, asking if they didn't think it was hard for teachers to have to teach something. He continued by saying that everyone is allowed to sit during class, but teachers are obliged to stand the whole time. The students were confused by Xiaosu's talk, while he asked everyone if that wasn't a reason to show gratitude to all teachers. The students, embarrassed, just agreed. The students looked at the teacher, who was also embarrassed by the situation. Xiaosu then told all the students that from now on, they would not greet by saying, "Good afternoon, teacher," but would now say, "Thank you, teacher." Xiaosu imagined that obviously all this was a lie, and he was just trying to collect gratitude from many people at once. Xiaosu then asked everyone to stand while they tried doing what he asked. The students complied, bowing and saying, "Thank you, teacher." Xiaosu, looking up, found it strange that he wasn't receiving any notifications indicating that he received gratitudes. He began to suspect that none of those kids were really being sincere in thanking a teacher. Xiaosu, racking his brain, thought he would let it go for now. After all, as the saying goes, life is not a bed of roses. He said he would think of other ways to receive these sincere gratitudes. Time passed, and Xiaosu was still teaching. He was drawing on the blackboard while saying that today they would talk about basic jungle survival skills. The students were sleepy, finding the class utterly boring. One student was annoyed as the teacher explained that a rabbit in the jungle would not actively attack people, but they are very strong and can jump high. The student just thought that the damn teacher wouldn't shut up at all. Xiaosu continued with his teachings, asking everyone to stay alert, as surviving in the jungle is very difficult. One student raised his hand interrupting him and almost calling him a bastard, but restrained himself and called him teacher, saying they needed to finish the class soon as it would soon be dark, and after that, it would be very dangerous to walk the streets alone. Xiaosu paused for a moment and realized it was true. He then raised his hand and said the whole class was dismissed, so everyone could head home. The students ran out, overjoyed, leaving and thanking the teacher for letting them go. At that moment, 2 coins fell onto the table where the typewriter was. Xiaosu was amazed, feeling that hard work really does pay off, as the students seemed genuinely grateful, even though he suspected their gratitude was more for being allowed to leave early. Xiaosu and his brother began walking home. Lu Yuan asked if it was possible to end classes early more often. Xiaosu replied that it wasn't, as he was committed to dedicating himself wholeheartedly to educating the children, and it was fine for him to teach after hours. Annoyed, Lu Yuan asked his brother to take it easy, arguing that this way he might harm the new generation of their country. Xiaosu smacked his brother on the head after hearing this, questioning what he knew. How were the students being harmed by gaining knowledge? Xiaosu argued that what corrupts a person is money, not knowledge, and everything he does is just for gratitude. Surprised, Lu Yuan told his brother to look ahead. Xiaosu then saw a group of mercenaries, and wondered if the older guy was Mr. Liu. He speculated whether he would be the guide for those mercenaries. Fugui then approached the brothers, drawing Xiaosu's attention. Fugui called him ungrateful, saying he had offered him a great job which he had turned down. Xiaosu, bored, asked how he knew it was a good job. Smiling, Fugui replied that it seemed Xiaosu really didn't understand the world. He explained that there are indeed rich and poor people in the fortress, but only important people have the permission to come and go as they please. Reflecting on the wall, Xiaosu thought that it was there not just to keep people from leaving, but also to prevent outsiders from entering. Fugui then put his hand on Xiaosu's back, and said he heard the group planned to find a truly competent guide who could take them into the fortress to always have someone to guide them when needed. He added that Xiaosu could use this chance for the future, as you never know when such an opportunity might arise. Xiaosu pondered this, while his brother asked if it wouldn't be interesting to talk to the group again. After all, Xiaosu had much more experience than old Mr. Liu. Xiaosu just began walking away, telling them to stop the nonsense and called his brother to leave the area. They passed by a shop. Liu Yuan caught Xiaosu's attention, asking if that person wasn't Sister Xiao Yu. They looked and saw Xiao Yu arguing that her pair of earrings was very valuable and questioning why the vendor wouldn't offer more for them. The vendor replied that she didn't really need to pawn them there, since she would have to. Xiaosu interrupted the vendor and handed money to Sister Xiao Yu, telling her not to worry about selling her own belongings. He explained that the money was a thank you for the 3 anti-inflammatory pills she had given him the night before. She was surprised by this. Holding the money, she began to ask what he meant by that. But before she could finish, Xiaosu said he had been thinking of buying medicine with that money anyway, so she could keep it. Xiaosu added that they didn't need to be so formal with each other in the future. Xiaosu thumped his chest, saying he could have died long ago if it weren't for the medicine she gave him, and asked her not to worry about it, that as long as there was meat for him to eat, he would ensure there was soup for her to drink. Lu Yuan approached Xiaosu, saying that wasn't the right thing to say. The correct thing to say is that everyone should eat meat together, because the way he said it implied he would luxuriate in eating meat alone while others got the leftovers, which is the soup. And besides, they don't even have meat in their house. Realizing the truth in this, Xiaosu thought he should try again. Xiaosu made another attempt to be a gentleman and told Sister Xiaoyu that as long as he had soup to drink, she would have bowls to wash. Lu Yuan was utterly disappointed with his brother's blunder. Xiaoyu smiles and says that's okay. She would like to wash the bowls for him. At this moment, a person nearby kneels down, begging the doctor to please save her husband. Xiaosu turns around, wondering what is happening, and sees a young woman on her knees, asking the doctor to save her husband, or else her family will not survive without him. The doctor, with a sinister expression, asks the woman what makes her think she can be seen by a doctor, if she doesn't even have any money. The doctor enters the residence, leaving the woman bent over on the ground, and the husband beside her, badly injured. Xiaosu, seeing the whole scene, tells his brother Lu Yuan to observe carefully what they have just witnessed, because that is the reality in which they live. They then head towards the cabin, saying it's good to run, since the acid rain was starting to fall from the sky. Xiaoyu runs to her cabin, which is next to the brothers' cabin, while they run inside theirs. Upon entering the tent, Lu Yuan asks his brother, who apparently is a doctor, if this is a good way to earn gratitude, because in the past, when the old doctor was still around, everyone was grateful for his presence. Lu Yuan, still looking at his brother, comments that it's a pity he doesn't know about medicine. Xiaosu just asks what crap he is blabbering about there. At that moment, Xiaosu has an idea, that although he is not a doctor, he could learn. He, imagining the typewriter in the palace, thinks that becoming a doctor he would make a lot of money, in addition to treating many people and thus receiving their gratitude. Xiaosu imagines that this would be killing two birds with one stone. The next day, Xiaosu is in front of the clinic, imagining that he has no idea what time it opens, but it doesn't hurt to arrive a little early. He looks at a clock and sees that it's already 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and wonders why the clinic hasn't opened yet. The door then opens. The doctor comes out of the clinic stretching, as he apparently just woke up. Xiaosu asks the doctor to teach him medicine, but the doctor is only frightened by that, saying he knows nothing. Xiaosu gets annoyed since he has no skill as a doctor. Xiaosu enters the clinic and throws his pan at the doctor's head, saying that the fake doctor has been making money from frauds and extortions for all these years. The doctor, crying and with a bump on his head, asks Xiaosu not to talk nonsense. The doctor, still with a headache, just says it was his fault, since he didn't read the newspaper when he went out today. Xiaosu takes his pan back and leaves the clinic, while imagining that, apparently, he will have to learn to become a doctor without acquiring medical skills. He looks at the wound on his arm and imagines that it is almost completely healed. He begins to smile, imagining the machine he has for making medicines, exchanging them for gratitude. That said, he would only need to open a clinic specializing in knife wounds. Xiaosu decides to return to his tent and upon entering, finds his sister Xiaoyu inside and asks what she is doing there. She smilingly replies that she noticed Xiaosu's clothes were a bit torn, so she decided to mend them for him. Xiaosu sees his brother walking and asks what that is in his hand. Lu Yuan replies that Sister Xiaoyu made porridge for all of them. Xiaosu then grabs his brother's neck, asking if by any chance he has already thanked Xiaoyu for her kindness. Lu Yuan, terrified, responds that not yet. However, he then bends down and thanks for the kindness. Xiaoyu stands up and asks Xiaosu not to hit his younger brother anymore. Xiaosu responds that he might pamper him for now, but no one will do that when the day comes that he is alone. Xiaoyu starts filling a plate with porridge while asking everyone to eat quickly. After all, the two brothers were still growing. Xiaosu, surprised by all that kindness, imagines that in all those years no one ever said they were growing or anything like that. Xiaoyu offers the plate of porridge to Xiaosu and tells him not to be in the clouds and to eat soon before it gets cold. Xiaosu and Lu Yuan start eating their porridge calmly. As he eats, Xiaosu notices that the clothes have been well sewn and compliments Xiaoyu, saying her sewing skills are great. He asks her if she would help him when he opens his clinic to treat knife wounds. She, looking at the clothes, asks, "What do you mean by knife wounds?" She questions why Xiaosu wants to open a clinic specifically specializing in knife wounds all of a sudden. By nightfall, Xiaosu simply responds that she will understand when the time comes. Xiaosu and Liu Yuan are already lying in bed. Xiaosu remains thoughtful while Liu Yuan is sleeping. Xiaosu closes his eyes and delves into his deep thoughts. He finds himself at the palace and decides to check how many coins he has collected in the last few days, as he hasn't checked until now. He looks at the coins and remembers that the day before he exchanged some gratitude coins for a bottle of black medicine, leaving him with 3 coins. Smiling, he starts to think that 1 gratitude coin can be exchanged for a bottle of black medicine, and this bottle can heal up to 3 people with the amount of ointment it contains. Therefore, having a bottle of medicine can generate up to 3 gratitude coins. Thus, it will certainly generate a good profit. Xiaosu looks at the bottle of medicine while imagining that the more black medicine he exchanges, the more gratitude coins he will receive. Following this path, he will probably be able to unlock the weapons much faster. Xiaosu decides this would work very well and resolves to go back to sleep, as the next day would be long. The next day arrives and Xiaosu decides to take a walk while saying goodbye to his brother and Xiao Yu, who is also in front of her house. As Xiaosu walks, he thinks of the saying, "In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king." Soon ahead there is a person hitting the ground with a pickaxe. There are some workers planting. Xiaosu, looking at the place, imagines that such a place has the best possible plan. The man, already quite sweaty, looks at Xiaosu and asks why he is carrying that bunch of seeds around. Xiaosu, tinkering with the earth, thinks that he brought some medicines with him, so he needs to find a way to not look too suspicious. With a sinister look, he thinks he needs to cut some plants to appear like a healer. Xiaosu stands up, goes to the man with the pickaxe, and says that those are not just any plants, they are medicinal herbs. The confused man asks if he is sure about that. Xiaosu confirms and adds that if he mixes different proportions, they can be boiled with herbs that heal wounds. Xiaosu also mentions that it was exactly how he cured that serious wound on his arm, and everyone in the village knows about that injury. The man with the pickaxe is surprised and asks if his wound did not heal just with a lot of willpower and the support of friends. Xiaosu gets annoyed hearing such nonsense and decides to leave there. Now, Xiaosu is in the cabin while several people are outside watching him. Xiaosu pretends to prepare his medicines while the people outside watch attentively, as rumors were already spreading throughout the village. Xiaosu chuckles, since apparently his plan is going well. Meanwhile, the people outside are gossiping about what was happening there with Xiaosu. Time passes, and Xiaosu starts to get impatient, as it seems that nobody cares. They just gossip, but do not ask for anything. He decides to leave the cabin and points his finger at one person. This person asks what happened. Xiaosu asks him to come closer. The man approaches while his colleagues mock him. Xiaosu puts an arm around the man's shoulders and whispers very low, asking the man to ask what Xiaosu is doing. The man asks why that? Xiaosu tells him just to ask. The worried man then asks Xiaosu what he was doing there in the tent. Xiaosu opens a huge smile and then points to the cauldron, saying he is preparing some medicinal herbs that will create great medicines that reduce pain and inflammation. And not only that, but it can also make injuries heal much faster. He even warns that the medicine is so special that everyone there needs to hide it from the rest of the world. Xiaosu points to the cauldron and says that at that moment he had realized what he did wrong, and that's why he decided to share the medicinal herbs with everyone. People begin to comment about it, while Xiaosu says he will open a clinic specializing in treating injuries and asks if anyone there is injured to try it. One of the men responds that no one will believe it's true, as Xiaosu probably just endured the pain of the injuries over time. The bald man replies that only ghosts would believe in such nonsense as healing wounds so quickly. Everyone turns their backs and decides to leave while Xiaosu worries, as it seems no one there cares about him. Xiaosu looks to the side and sees that the first man he called was still there. Xiaosu looks at the man's arm and notices it has a bandaged wound. Xiaosu seizes the opportunity, grabs the man's arm, and like a born salesman, he asks the potential customer if he hurt his arm at work. Because if so, Xiaosu has a great special medicine there that will heal it quickly. Xiaosu also asks the man if he would like to try it. The man says it's not necessary. Xiaosu doesn't care about that answer and pushes the man against a pillar, saying that for the sake of publicity, he will heal that wound for free. He says this while holding the medicine bottle. Xiaosu applies the medicine to the man's arm, and then the man runs off in a panic, while Xiaosu waves his arm thanking him for the preference. Xiaosu goes back inside the house while his brother asks if he really cured someone for free, as that is not like him. Xiaosu gets stressed, telling him to shut up or he'll kill him. Xiaosu can only imagine that everything is difficult at the beginning. After all, people with great ambitions should not be discouraged by obstacles in their path. The next day then arrives. Someone calls Xiaosu from outside the tent. It was old Wang. Xiaosu asks him what he is doing there so early, especially since Xiaosu hasn't gone hunting recently. Wang happily asks if Xiaosu really treated Ironhead the previous day. Xiaosu, not quite understanding, asks if that man's name is Ironhead, but Xiaosu doesn't remember him having such a hard head. Wang, trying to seize the opportunity, asks if Xiaosu still has the medicine. He even asks him to deliver it to him since he can sell it for Xiaosu. Xiaosu responds that he would never do that, as he doesn't want someone acting as a middleman taking part of the profit. Wang says that's not a problem, but asks him to sell some to him, and he will buy it with pleasure. Xiaosu, seeing all that, smile, finds it strange, and says to Wang that he isn't even injured, so why would he want to buy it? Wang then comes closer and comments that Ironhead was suspicious after he returned home, since the medicine was very good. So, out of curiosity to know what was applied on him, he decided to lick that medicine. Xiaosu, surprised hearing all this, comments that he never imagined that the medicine could be used internally. Wang, with a huge smile, says that after Ironhead licked the medicine, he and his wife had sex all night until morning. Wang says that the medicine was extremely effective and asks Xiaosu where he got that. Xiaosu brags, saying it's a recipe from one of his ancestors. Wang doesn't quite believe that. Xiaosu, suspicious, asks why a bachelor like Wang would want to buy that. Wang, just smiling, says it's none of his business. Xiaosu says that's fine, but it will cost 600 yuan, already discounted for being a friend. Wang pays for the medicine without a second thought, and thanks for the sale. At this moment, the system notifies that a gratitude was obtained from Wang. Xiaosu finds Wang's happy face very strange, and is sure that he clearly wouldn't use it to heal wounds. After leaving there, Wang goes near a gate. Arriving there, Wang is holding the medicine bottle while some men in suits are around him. Wang extends his hand saying that this is the medicine he mentioned. Back at Xiaosu's house, he is preparing the facade of his new clinic. He finally puts up a sheet that reads, "Kind doctor specialized in knife wounds," and starts to think that he is about to make a great deal. At that moment, some people running towards him, bleeding heavily. They are 3 severely injured men who can only say that they need to move quickly. The men pass in front of Xiaosu, saying that they need to go to the city clinic urgently. Xiaosu's eyes light up seeing 3 injured people as potential clients. At this moment, the system notifies a new mission, that he must treat 3 patients. Xiaosu puts his hand on his face and already apologizes for what he will need to do. He starts running towards all the injured men. He approaches and grabs them all at once without giving them a chance to react. Xiaosu takes the 3 men to his tent and ties all 3 so they don't escape. One of the men gets angry and starts asking what the hell Xiaosu is doing. Xiaosu replies that the city doctor is nothing but a fraud, so they would only waste time going there. Besides, all that Xiaosu is doing is saving their lives. At this moment, Xiao Yu comes out of the tent, while Xiaosu asks her to come treat those men. The beautiful Xiao Yu approaches the men while asking if they were perhaps in a gang fight. The man with a cut on his shoulder and still in a lot of pain explains that it wasn't that. They were at the factory and the boiler exploded. Still recounting what happened, he says that the 3 of them only managed to get there because the injuries weren't so severe. However, some other people weren't so lucky and died instantly. Xiaosu feels sorry hearing that, imagining that this is the reality, since at that time no one will take care of you if you are injured. The superiors will only wait for the person to die to take their belongings. Xiaosu calls his sister Xiao Yu inside the tent and asks her to disinfect the needle and stitch their wounds. Xiao Yu is startled and asks if he wants her to just start stitching like that. He says yes, and she can stitch in the same way she sewed his clothes. Xiao Yu is worried about the situation, but says that she will do it. She then immediately takes the needle to the fire. Next, she brings it to the cut of the man who was injured on the shoulder. The man begins to scream in agony. He stands up enraged, yelling at her that he understands she needs to use the fire to disinfect the needle, but asks her to at least wait for the needle to cool down before stitching. She is embarrassed hearing this while Xiaosu apologizes for it, since it's the first day of the nurse's job, so she isn't so familiar with the processes, but she will improve over time. Xiaosu starts to get some ointment from the bottle, imagining that now is the time to apply the medicine. He smiles, thinking that this medicine is a real treasure, but he won't charge any extra from these people, since 600 yuan per person is already great. Xiaosu grabs the man and starts applying the medicine, while commenting that a factory worker's salary is 2,000, and based on that, Xiaosu asks if he will have the 600 yuan to pay for saving his life. The man, trembling all over, says that's fine, but Xiaosu could be a bit gentler. One of the patients, seeing all the commotion, stands up. One of the men starts to flee from there, scared of everything, while Xiao Su watches him run like crazy. The other man also tries to flee, but is stopped by Xiao Su. Xiao Su still asks the nurse Xiao Yu to stitch the wounds of that man quickly, that he will go after the man who fled. Xiao Yu, smiling, asks the man if he wants to run away, because if he does, she can stitch him up later, after Xiao Su catches him. The man, knowing that running away would be futile, says he won't try anything and she can stitch him up now. At this moment, Xiao Su is running at full speed after the man who fled. The man who fled in fear moves quite far from the others. He is catching his breath while being glad that he can run fast, but at that moment a hand slaps his back. The man turns to see what it is. It was Xiao Su asking where he thinks he's going. Xiao Su then takes the man back to the hut, while Xiao Yu was treating the other two. She then begins to stitch the arm of the man who tried to flee. The system notifies that the mission was completed successfully, and with that, Xiao Su received 1 point of strength and 1 point of agility. One of the men who was treated with the medicine says that his wound is no longer hurting and that the medicine seems to be very effective. At this moment, a new mission arrives for Xiao Su, and this time he needs to treat 10 patients. He realizes that in fact a chain mission is occurring. Night falls. Now, near Xiao Su's house, it is possible to hear screams of someone saying that a pack of wolves has invaded the town. Xiao Su, his brother, and Xiao Yu were talking until that moment, but they become alert with that warning. Xiao Su goes towards the outside, while Lu Yuan asks if there's a chance the wolves could reach their house. Xiao Su responds that the wolves are quite intelligent, so they wouldn't take the risk of coming to their house. Xiao Su comments that probably the wolves smelled the blood from the factory where the explosion occurred, and besides, they have the fortress protecting them. Lu Yuan pauses to observe those explanations, and then he decides to ask Xiao Su how one survives a wolf attack. Lu Yuan comments that his brother never talked about this. Xiao Su is quiet for a moment. However, before answering the question, he hears a scream calling for everyone to gather outside. Xiao Su immediately puts out the candle in his house, saying that it seems enemies have appeared outside. Xiao Su also closes the curtains of the house windows. Lu Yuan sees the worried face of Xiao Su and then decides to ask why he is like that. Xiao Su only responds by asking, "What if the fortress falls one day?" Xiao Yu starts to get worried and asks if that is really possible. Those powerful walls falling one day. Xiao Su, trying to keep calm, says that he really doesn't know, but nothing in this world lasts forever. At this moment, the huge city gate opens. Several mercenaries enter the city through the giant gate. The mercenaries take position, all heavily armed. Lu Yuan, seeing those mercenaries, asks his brother if those things on the mercenaries' backs are weapons. Xiao Su tells him not to ask so many questions. Lu Yuan gets annoyed with these responses his brother gives and tells him to remember that Lu Yuan still has status in that family. Xiao Su tells him to be quiet again, saying the only status he has in that family is being alive. A mercenary asks another if what happened inside was just some deaths inside the factory, because if that's the case they could leave tomorrow morning, then why do the superiors want them to kill wolves all night? The other mercenary tells him to shut up. After all, he is aware that it was an order from the superiors, so it was just to carry it out without complaining. The mercenary who is stretching asks the other why he is scared. After all, the superiors can't hear that anyway. They in fact must be in bed with their wives. Xiao Su looks at that huge weapon on the back of the mercenary and imagines that the skill duplication scroll is really useful, since he is recognizing all those weapons in detail. Xiao Su still imagines that if he can get at least one of those weapons, he will be able to use it without much trouble. All the mercenaries begin to walk through the city that night. Xiao Su, looking at them, asks Lu Yuan to sleep at his sister Xiao Yu's house that night, and to return from her house only after Yao Su comes back home. Xiao Su goes outside while his brother asks where he thinks he's going. Xiao Su doesn't respond, just quickly runs away. A man at that moment is straining so much that he even trembles. He is defecating under the moonlight. This man is furious because he cannot defecate in peace. At that moment, Xiao Su is running at full speed through the city. The man, while defecating, notices a shadow passing by his side and recognizes who it is. He wonders what Xiao Su could be doing out so late at night. Xiao Su runs towards the flames caused by the explosion at the factory, since the mercenaries were probably there. As he runs, Xiao Su starts to think that the factory administrators had firearms in their possession and yet were attacked by a wolf pack. Xiao Su imagines that probably the administrators didn't have time to use them since wolves are extremely fast. He reflects further on the situation and imagines that if this is really the case, then the weapons are no longer in the factory. He finally reaches near the factory. As he approaches, he notices something happening. Several mercenaries are facing some wolves. There are also some bodies on the ground, both of people and wolves. The wolves are ready to attack, even drooling from such hunger for fresh meat. The mercenaries, with their guns pointed, are worried, since apparently the wolves are not afraid of the bullets at all. The administrators are behind the mercenaries. They are constantly asking them to shoot right away. One of the people in a suit pats the back of a mercenary, ordering him to shoot immediately. The mercenary, due to the imbalance caused by the push, ends up shooting unintentionally. The shot hits right in the paw of one of the wolves, creating a significant hole. The wolves, witnessing this, become even more furious. They decide to attack that bunch of mercenaries without caring for the weapons they had. The mercenaries, completely terrified, start to scream, entering into a panic. In the shadows of the combat, it was possible to see the wolves massacring the mercenaries. Xiaosu immediately runs away from there, ignoring what is happening. He watches that massacre unfold, while imagining that that private army is fighting all the wolves, so probably all the people are there. Therefore, the inside of the factory must be empty. Xiaosu stops for a moment, since he needs to be stealthy, as no one can notice his presence. All he could see there were the dead bodies on the ground. Xiaosu continues observing those corpses, and he judges by the state of those bodies that the wolves needed only a single bite to kill each of those people. Xiaosu thinks it was a good idea to avoid all of them. Still worried that he cannot let anyone see him there, he imagines that he needs to look inside the factory. He then approaches and gets ever closer to the factory while looking for a way to get in. He then takes a leap and jumps over some crates until he reaches a staircase. Xiaosu manages to get to the stairs and then climbs them without much trouble. Upon reaching the top of the factory, he looks around carefully to make sure there was no one there. After realizing that the area is clear, he starts walking on top of the factory trying to find some entrance. He looks at some glass panels on the factory roof and imagines that he needs to find a way to jump inside the factory. Before deciding to jump, he looks around to make sure no one is nearby. He puts on his hood to try to hide better, takes his knife in hand, and then breaks the glass on the roof, causing it to fall from above into the factory. Xiaosu lands on the floor without much trouble. He starts looking around, pleased that he has finally managed to enter, but still remains alert in case someone shows up there. He starts walking inside the factory, and right away comes across a pile of dead bodies. Still observing all those dead bodies, Xiaosu notices that a battle had started there, as curiously all the bodies are turned in the same direction, as if they had all been trying to run to a single place. He looks at a staircase, and thinks that in times of danger there are only two places people might try to escape to. First, it would be to an emergency shelter, and as a second option, they would go where they have weapons to defend themselves. Xiaosu then decides to follow the stairs, and all along the way there are dead bodies on the ground, nearly all lying in the same direction. Xiaosu reaches the end of the path and becomes worried as he stands before a huge door with red lights, which apparently is an emergency shelter. He stands before that huge door, and those corpses on the ground, and tries to imagine what he should do now. Xiaosu puts his hand on the door and starts to wonder if it is really locked. He decides to knock on the door to see if there is anyone inside. Upon knocking, he puts his ear to the door to try to hear something inside the shelter. At that moment, someone inside presses a button to open the door. Xiaosu notices the door opening and asks if there really is someone inside who opened the door. After the door opens a bit, Xiaosu immediately jumps inside, while the man who opened the door asks if the young man was there to save him. However, the man who opened the door notices that the young man's clothing is not military. Xiaosu enters forcefully and stands face to face with the man. The man points his gun, saying he recognizes that person, that he is Xiaosu and apparently an intruder. Xiaosu also recognizes the man. He is Dongyang, a factory administrator. Dongyang immediately closes the door again so that Xiaosu cannot escape. Xiaosu is worried about the situation as he sees the door being closed at his side. Dongyang smiles, having the advantage of having a gun, while Xiaosu is worried, trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. Xiaosu tries to stay calm, as the factory administrator has a gun in his hands, so the advantage is clearly his. Xiaosu observes carefully and sees that the gun's safety pin is locked. He smiles at being in that situation and understanding what it means, since he is now an expert in firearms. He raises his hands, showing he is defenseless, and asks if the man isn't Dongyang. Dongyang orders Xiaosu not to move, while Xiaosu asks why he was the only one inside that shelter. Before the man answers, Xiaosu already gets enraged as he realizes that something there is wrong. He tells Dong Yang that apparently he got there first to the shelter and immediately locked the door, letting everyone else die outside. Dong Yang tells the miserable Xiaosu to shut up, that it's none of his business. Dong Yang orders him to take him back safely to the city, saying that by doing so he will spare his life. Xiaosu smiles furiously and asks why he would spare his life. After all, is Dong Yang afraid that Xiaosu will tell everyone that he sacrificed the lives of everyone inside the factory just to survive alone? Dong Yang smiles worriedly and asks how he knows that. Xiaosu smiles and says, like father, like son. Dong is left confused. Dong Yang gets even more irritated and says he will not hesitate to kill Xiaosu right there. Dong also says that he could simply kill Xiaosu right now and run towards the army. After all, he is from the fortress, so the army needs to save him at all costs. Xiaosu immediately grabs his knife and rushes at Dong Yang, saying he is very stupid for not noticing that the safety catch of the gun he is holding is still activated, so it is not possible for him to shoot. Dong is confused, since he really didn't notice that. Xiaosu, without wasting time, hits the gun from his hand and cuts his wrist, causing a lot of blood to flow. After that, Xiaosu still elbows Dong Yang, throwing him away. Xiaosu goes up to him and places the knife on his chest. Dong Yang becomes worried when he sees that he really could die there. He starts to beg for his life, and even says that if Xiaosu spares him, he can tell where the money is hidden. Xiaosu then orders him to first tell where the money is, and only then will he let him go. Dong Yang, already quite injured, starts to think that Xiaosu is very young, so he just needs to stall him there until the private army arrives to save him. Xiaosu, still pointing the knife at Dong Yang's chest, asks if he's crazy to try buying Xiaosu this way. He further comments that Dong's lungs have already been punctured by his broken ribs, so how long does he think he can live before finding the army? Xiaosu then asks why Dong doesn't make it easier for himself. Annoyed, Xiaosu plunges his knife into Dong's chest, causing more blood to gush out. Xiaosu finishes cutting Dong's chest and starts searching his clothes for anything valuable. He finds 2 bullet cartridges and decides to take them along with the pistol. Xiaosu starts to leave the place, imagining he needs to get out of there urgently, since the rescue team should arrive at any moment. Xiaosu feels relieved to finally arrive at his home. Lu Yuan is happy to see him and asks if he wasn't hurt. Xiaosu replies that he's fine and asks if anything happened while he was gone. By any chance, has the private army already returned from the mission? Lu Yuan replies that some of the mercenaries returned with minor injuries. He says this while checking Xiaosu's arm to see if he's really okay. Xiaosu gets stressed, saying he already said he's fine, so there's no need to check anything. Xiaosu begins to fill his cup with tea, while Lu Yuan says that the army personnel also brought the bodies of their companions, along with the wild wolves. The rest of them went to the factory. Xiaosu starts drinking his tea while thinking that firearms are really effective for scaring off a pack. He also imagines that against the private army's firearms, their chances of winning are very low. The army then returns to the village. They arrive in 2 cars and start shouting for everyone to come out of their houses. Some people come out and ask the army what's going on. The leader of that private army group immediately says that anyone who reports someone who left the town that night will be generously rewarded. At this moment, Xiaosu and his brother leave their tent to check what's going on. Xiaosu begins to worry, wondering why the army is there, especially since before Xiaosu returned to the village, he disguised Dong Yang's wounds to make it look like he was attacked by wolf claws. He also imagines that it's very difficult for ordinary people to notice that. Xiaosu, still worried, imagines that the group might have noticed the pistol missing from Dong Yang's body, and that's probably why they're so skeptical. The soldiers begin to interrogate everyone one by one while Xiaosu imagines that they must be looking for the pistol. At this moment, a person raises their hand and shouts that they know who left last night. The white-haired man shouts that he saw Xiaosu leaving the village, saw it with his own eyes. He also points at Xiaosu, saying that he is the one who left. Xiaosu is startled to realize that someone actually saw him leaving the night before, even though he was cautious. The army leader then orders the soldiers to search Xiaosu. As they approach, Fugi runs towards the soldiers, asking them to wait, as Xiaosu is someone Chief Luo from the fortress asked to be taken care of, so the army can't treat him this way. The army leader approaches and asks Fugi what he meant by that. Fugi explains that if he wants more details, he should contact Chief Luo, as Fugi was instructed not to say anything about the matter. The army leader then becomes pensive about it, as he knows well who Chief Luo is. The army leader, after thinking for a bit, says that, unfortunately, it doesn't matter if Xiaosu is under Chief Luo's protection. Unfortunately, it's not possible to turn a blind eye to that situation. The leader further explains that this is an extremely important matter, so they will search Xiaosu and his house, and then the army leader will personally go and apologize to Chief Luo to explain why that happened. The soldiers then start searching Xiaosu's body for the missing pistol. Xiaosu starts to feel uneasy with the situation, but tries to remain calm. The soldiers then decide to enter Xiaosu's house to search the place, but Lu Yuan stands in front of the door with a knife pointed at them, saying they won't enter. Xiaosu, infuriated, orders his brother to get out of the way and let the soldiers do their job. Lu Yuan, trembling all over, remains silent for a moment. The town doctor, who reported Xiaosu, laughs, thinking Xiaosu is going to get in big trouble. The soldiers finally enter Xiaosu's house and start searching everything. All 3 soldiers turn the place upside down looking for the hidden pistol. Lu Yuan, extremely worried about the situation, just begins to pray, asking that the soldiers don't find anything in the house. The soldiers continue their search, now almost lifting the cooking pot. The leader of the group asks if they found what they were looking for. Before the soldier can see what's under the pot, he responds that they haven't found anything so far. The leader then orders them to stop. The soldiers halt their search and begin to leave. They don't notice the gun under the cooking pot, luckily. Lu Yuan feels extremely relieved that his prayers were answered. It's fair to say his lucky charm played a significant role in this outcome. Xiaosu stands with his hands raised, waiting for the soldiers to finish what they were doing. Xiaosu, enraged, just looks at the doctor who reported him. The doctor worries about what might happen next. Fugi approaches Xiaosu and puts a hand on his shoulder, saying that it seems unnecessary for him to intervene since Xiaosu would have been fine anyway. Xiaosu thanks him for his help. Fugi, smiling, tells Xiaosu he doesn't need to be so polite. After all, if it weren't for Chief Luo's recognition, he would probably have been too scared to help. Xiaosu takes the opportunity to ask who the hell is this Chief Luo? Do the two of them know each other? Fugi gets closer to Xiaosu's ear and says that Chief Luo is the representative of Fortress 113. Fugi also explains that Chief Luo really liked the medicine Xiaosu made. Xiaosu, surprised, realizes now why Fugi wanted to buy that black bottle medicine at any cost. Apparently, he bought it and immediately sent it to the fortress. Fugi adds that Chief Luo asked to inform Xiaosu that if he delivers a fixed amount of that medicine to him, Luo will ensure Xiaosu's safety outside the fortress. Xiaosu then asks if he can request Chief Luo to allow them into the fortress. Fugi, desperate, says they are dirty people, so how could they be allowed into the fortress? Besides, if Xiaosu is inside the fortress, who will gather the medicinal herbs outside to make the medicine? Fugi adds that if it were possible, he himself would like to enter the fortress. Xiaosu becomes indignant, as it seems Chief Luo won't allow it since he needs Xiaosu to make the black medicine. At that moment, Lu Yuan starts trembling and feeling ill. He grabs Xiaosu's clothes and then collapses to the ground. Xiaosu and Fugi are startled. Xiaosu starts shouting at his brother, asking him to wake up. Xiaosu takes his brother to the bed and calls Xiaoyu to help him take care of Lu Yuan. She prepares a towel with warm water to alleviate Lu Yuan's fever. Xiaosu says everything will be fine, despite a high fever being dangerous. Xiaosu begins to imagine that Lu Yuan made a wish for him and is now suffering from the side effects. Lu Yuan, still feeling unwell, says he doesn't care since he couldn't stand to see anything happen to his brother. Xiaoyu finally prepares the warm water towel and places it on Lu Yuan's forehead to reduce the fever. Lu Yuan catches Xiaoyu's attention and apologizes for worrying her earlier. Xiaoyu smiles and asks why he's apologizing. She praises them for being very brave for their age. Besides that, they are also very mature because if they had childish thoughts, they probably wouldn't have survived this long. Liu Yuan responds that they've only survived this long because Xiaosu is such a good person. Xiaosu is happy to hear that from his brother. He turns to Liu Yuan and tells him not to worry, promising that he'll ensure Liu Yuan has a good and comfortable life. Liu Yuan chuckles lightly, asking if it was really Xiaosu talking. That's embarrassing. Xiaosu just tells him to shut up. Morning arrives. Xiaosu decides to leave his house carrying a bucket. As he steps out, he hears, "Good morning, Xiaosu. Congratulations to you." Xiaosu hears this and is confused. It was Fugi asking if Xiaosu hadn't heard the news yet. He explains that Dr. Yutong was so scared last night that he took some money and fled. So now, Xiaosu is the only doctor in town. Fugi says that the fortress administrators have given Dr. Yutong's house to Xiaosu, so he can move in today. Fugi also says he has a small gift for Xiaosu and Liu Yuan since they are still growing. Fugi hands him a small box and asks him to eat it as it is a supplement. Xiaosu opens the box, and Fugi explains that it is a bird's nest that Fugi himself cherished for many years. It is very nutritious. Xiaosu takes it in his hand and doesn't see anything special. He asks if it's a bird's nest. Xiaosu adds that he heard from Mr. Jinglin that a bird's nest is made using swallow saliva, but since Yaosu didn't think saliva was coherent enough, he deduced it was made from bird phlegm. Fugi hears this and finds the thought disgusting. Fugi desperately asks Xiaosu not to be so gross. After all, bloodbirds' nests also exist. Fugui asks what the heck Xiaosu thought it was made of. Xiaosu responds, "Phlegm with blood." After saying this, he just says it's all a joke. Fugui puts his arm around Xiaosu's shoulder and asks them to stop chatting and get down to business. Fugi asks how the stock of medicinal herbs used to prepare the medicine is. He asks this because it's probably running low. Xiaosu says he just bought the medicine, so why does he want to know? Fugui feels embarrassed and says he bought it recently, but it was for the fortress authorities. Xiaosu laughs at the situation. Fugui gets stressed and asks Xiaosu to stop pretending to be an idiot. After all, if it weren't for Fugi delivering the medicine to the fortress bosses, Xiaosu wouldn't have gotten a clinic out of nowhere. Xiaosu thinks for a moment, then shows a bottle of the medicine and says this time the cost is 1,200 yuan. Without thinking twice, Fugui immediately takes the medicine from Xiaosu's hand and gives the money in the other hand, saying the deal is done between them. Xiaosu finds it strange and notices that the system notified him that he gained another gratitude point from Fugi. Xiaosu is surprised, thinking that Fugui is really interesting. He indeed thanked him sincerely. Fugi says goodbye and asks Xiaosu to pack up immediately to move to the clinic. After all, it's a brick house that many people have their eyes on. Xiaosu, Liu Yuan, and Xiao Yu decide to visit the clinic to see what it's like. They finally arrive at the door. They enter the house and start looking around. Liu Yuan points up and says there's a flag right in the middle. The flag reads, Lu Lan Rejuvenation. Xiaosu gets stressed, asking what the heck that is. The doctor was really a fraud. At that moment, the system notifies that there's a mission available where Xiaosu needs to treat 10 patients. The system asks if Xiaosu wants to continue with the mission. Xiaosu, full of confidence, says yes. At that moment, 2 people arrive at the clinic, calling for the doctor. Xiaosu immediately notices their presence and turns, asking where she is hurt, and assuring her that coming to the clinic was the best decision. The man accompanying the woman says that's great. He explains that his wife is 4 months pregnant and that morning her stomach suddenly started hurting. They were afraid of what it could be and decided to go to the clinic. Xiaosu, with a huge smile on his face, asks the woman what she is pregnant with. After saying that, he is startled since the issue is pregnancy, not an injury, which would be a big problem. Xiaosu becomes thoughtful, thinking that things have become complicated since he has no idea what to do with a pregnancy. Xiaosu asks the man if he wants his wife or the child. The man asks what he means by that. Both the man and the woman are completely confused by the doctor's question. Xiaosu starts laughing, apologizing, and says he will be honest with them, informing them that he is not an obstetrician, so it would be shameful if he continued deceiving them. Xiaosu, still smiling, puts his hand on their shoulders and asks them to go to the school and borrow some books from Mr. Zhang. Xiaosu also advises her not to take any medication on her own, since he heard that pregnant women shouldn't take medicine. In any case, they can ask Mr. Zhang about anything they don't understand. Xiaosu bids them farewell, asking them to be careful on their way. As they start to leave, the man turns and tells Xiaosu that apparently he is a bit better than the former doctor. The man explains that the last time he was sick, the former doctor was afraid he wouldn't spend any money on his medicine. In the end, the man didn't get better even after taking all the medication. The man and the woman bow, thanking Xiaosu for his help. At this moment, the system notifies that Xiaosu received 2 gratitude points from the pregnant woman. Xiaosu finds it strange, asking how both gratitude points came from the woman. Xiaosu turns, thinking that he never thought he could receive gratitude just by being honest. Xiaosu returns to the clinic, thinking that from now on he will only treat what he can, and if he can't, he will give up right away. Some time passes. Xiaosu continues treating a patient while Liu Yuan carries water. Xiaosu also asks his sister Xiao Yu to help him. She replies that it's okay. At that moment, Xiaosu had already treated 9 patients, needing only the current patient to complete the mission of 10. Xiao Yu stitches up the patient's wound, and he starts screaming that it hurts a lot. After finishing, Xiaosu asks them to come back again. The patient, in his thoughts, wonders if the doctor is crazy. What does he mean by come back again? Does he want him to get hurt again? He could at least say something nicer. Xiaosu bids farewell and asks the man to make sure his mother drinks plenty of hot water after they leave. The man says he will do that. They say their goodbyes and leave. At that moment, the system notifies Xiaosu that he earned a gratitude point and completed the mission of treating 10 patients. As a reward, Xiaosu gained a strength point. His next mission is to treat 20 patients. Xiaosu starts to think that the missions are getting more difficult since this next one has doubled the goal. Xiaosu also asks the system to inform him of his current stats. The system reports that Xiaosu currently has 5.5 points of strength and 4.1 points of agility. Xiaosu, within the palace, says that's great. Lu Yuan, carrying medical kits, asks his brother why he didn't treat all the patients since it would involve money. Xiaosu, organizing the shelves, asks what he would do if he couldn't treat them. Wouldn't that be the same as worsening the patient's conditions? Lu Yuan, looking at Xiaosu, says that the former doctor didn't know how to treat patients, but treated them all the same. Xiaosu explains that he can't use that fake doctor as a good example. After all, look how he ended up. Xiaosu further explains that even when the doctor wanted to leave, no one wanted to help him because no one trusted him. Besides, everything has a limit. Lu Yuan, furious, asks if something happened to the two of them. Would anyone help? After all, at the beginning of the year, people were hoping something would happen to them. Xiaosu places his arm on Lu Yuan's shoulder. Lu Yuan looks to the side, not understanding anything. Xiaosu then squeezes his brother's shoulder hard until he feels a bit of pain. Xiaosu asks his brother to remember this, not to let past grievances disturb his present. Lu Yuan is confused about whether that is really the right thing to do. At that moment, someone approaches the clinic door. Xiaosu looks outside and sees a client calling for him. The man then enters the clinic and informs Xiaosu that he has developed a very strange problem and asks him to please take a look, but also requests that it remains a secret. Xiaosu, already laughing, asks him what the problem is and adds that he can't treat erectile issues. The man asks him not to talk nonsense. The man then closes the clinic door. His expression changes, saying he will demonstrate the problem but hopes they won't be scared. Xiaosu starts to find it suspicious. The man then puffs up his cheeks and spits out something purple. A kind of purple ball comes out of the man's mouth. Xiaosu asks if that's all the problem is. The ball then bursts. A vortex is created where the bubble was, causing a strong wind. The wind grows stronger, making Xiaosu need to protect himself. Lu Yuan is thrown back, not expecting that to happen. Lu Yuan screams for his brother, asking what that is. Xiaosu is also confused by the situation. He looks at the man who is also protecting himself from the wind caused by the bubble and thinks that the force isn't that strong. However, without a doubt, that didn't come from normal saliva. Xiaosu tells the man that it's probably not a disease but a supernatural ability. The confused man asks what he means by a supernatural ability. Still in a state of excitement, the man asks if this supernatural ability is similar to those people who can materialize something in the air or things like that. Xiaosu replies that it is. The man then bows, thanking him for the information, and says he will tell his parents immediately about this. The system informs Xiaosu that he has received another gratitude point from that man. Night falls. Xiaosu and his brother are lying in bed. Xiaosu is thoughtful about how supernatural people are appearing in that small village. He wonders if the place is undergoing changes. Xiaosu happily thinks that the world is indeed becoming more dangerous, despite him having secured the palace for himself. Besides, he collected quite a few gratitude points that day, so he'll probably be able to unlock the weapon soon. At that moment, someone starts climbing the wall of Xiaosu's house. He notices a strange noise coming from outside, and quickly gets up. 3 men are climbing over the wall. The 3 men with bandanas over their faces finally manage to climb over the wall and land in Xiaosu's yard. At that moment, a large shadow approaches them. It is Xiaosu, with a diabolical look, asking what they think they are doing there. The 3 men panic upon seeing Xiaosu outside. Xiaosu immediately kicks the man in the middle in the groin, causing him to fall to the ground immediately. The man on the ground, writhing in pain, tells the other 2 to attack Xiaosu immediately and not let him leave alive. The 2 men with bandanas over their faces charge at Xiaosu. Xiaosu is bored with the situation and just waits for the men to come at him. The fight continues for a while. Xiaosu is standing while the men are on their knees, begging for Xiaosu to spare their lives. Xiaosu, irritated, asks who ordered them to do this. At that moment, the army is in front of the clinic door. The leader knocks on the door, asking it to be opened immediately. Xiaosu is startled to hear that, and wonders why all those people are awake in the middle of the night. Xiaosu then opens the door, and immediately the leader announces that they have a search warrant. At that moment, the army is confused by what they see. Xiaosu was wearing the flag from the clinic. The soldiers burst out laughing, asking why on earth he was wearing that flag. Xiaosu, smiling, simply asks why the army is there so late at night. The soldiers ask if he has a problem with his head. Xiaosu keeps smiling, thinking that maybe the army won't search his house after seeing the Luolan flag. The leader then orders everyone to search inside the house. Xiaosu asks if they haven't already done that. The squad leader replies that they did it before, but this time they might find something. Xiaosu watches the soldiers entering his house and starts to worry since the situation isn't good. The leader then sees the 3 men tied up and calls them idiots, saying he sent them to look for weapons. But they not only failed, but also ended up tied up. The squad leader looks at Xiaosu, who just whistles to the side as if he knows nothing about it. The army leader informs Xiaosu that his name is Wang Kongyang, and if they want to complain to Chief Lan, they can use that name. Xiaosu tries to keep his cheerful expression and says he would never do that. After all, Kongyang isn't harming anyone, they're just doing their job. He thinks that it's strange, since the name has the same surname as Dongyang, from whom Xiaosu stole the pistol. Xiaosu wonders if that's the case. Will this leader forgive him so easily? After searching the entire house, the soldiers report that they didn't find any firearms. Kongyang states that they will continue searching until the pistol thief is caught. He also tells Xiaosu to be very careful. Kongyang walks over to Xiaosu, puts his hand on his shoulder, and says it would have been great if Xiaosu had been born in the fortress. Kongyang continues walking while asking Xiaosu to become a subordinate under his command. After all, Xiaosu would be much better than those idiots. Xiaosu goes outside to watch the army leave and thinks he was very lucky since he decided to hide the pistol in the mountains when he went to gather some medicinal herbs a few days ago. Xiaosu is relieved that he wasn't discovered this time, but he worries that the soldiers came heavily armed, which he didn't expect to happen so quickly. The night passes, and morning finally arrives. Xiaosu and Liu Yuan wake up to people shouting outside, saying the gang has returned. They decide to leave the house to see how they are. Liu Yuan asks if they didn't leave a week ago, wondering why they returned so suddenly. Xiaosu has the same question. Several people were standing outside as well. The men from the private army are badly injured. People comment that they left all tough, but returned in this miserable state. Xiaosu observes the group returning all injured, and thinks that the wolf pack only appeared a little after they left. So what did they encounter out there? By looking at everyone, Xiaosu can deduce each one's contribution just by looking at the state of their clothes. Xiaosu looks at the red-eyed woman and says she is clearly much stronger than everyone in that group, as her proficiency with firearms is perfect. Liu Yuan comments to his brother that apparently the private army is looking for old Fugui. They see a car passing by and imagine the group must have gone to get Fugui. Apparently the guide Fugui recommended didn't return with the group, so probably something happened along the way. A woman with blue hair, accompanied by 2 men from the private army, finds Fugui and asks him what kind of guide he arranged for the army. That guide made them lose 3 days for nothing, and in the end, even got the direction wrong. Fugui is worried, as the guide wasn't very helpful, and asks where the guide is. The woman replies that she has no idea. She only saw the guide being dragged by something in the river, and when the army found his body, it was already cold. Xiaosu, hearing that conversation from afar, finds the story strange since he has never heard of a river in that area. Fugui says that he warned them. If the private army wanted to go to the Jing Mountains, they should ask for help from the specialist Xiaosu, but the army didn't believe it. However, now it's no longer possible since Xiaosu and Fugui are working for Chief Luo. The blue-haired woman asks if he really knows Chief Luo. She also asks if this Xiaosu is that crazy kid who said, "Father and son are safe?" when Fugui introduced Xiaosu to the army. Fugui replies that it is indeed him. The blue-haired woman asks Fugui if he is absolutely sure that Xiaosu is the only one capable of taking them to the Jing Mountains. Fugui responds that he is absolutely sure. The blue-haired woman says fine. She then walks to the car and asks all the soldiers to return to the fortress. Fugui bids them farewell, thanking them for finally leaving. Fugui notices Xiaosu was watching their conversation. Xiaosu decides to go back inside the clinic while Fugui runs towards him, saying that he helped scare off that gang again. So shouldn't Xiaosu thank him appropriately? Xiaosu turns and asks what he means by appropriately thanking him. Fugui asks if Xiaosu hasn't forgiven him yet. After all, Fugui recommended him with good intentions. Xiaosu says he doesn't mind that, and even asks why Fugui doesn't go himself. Xiaosu offers to draw the route to the mountain for him, so Fugui can also enter the fortress shelter. Fugui explains that even with the route, he is not as skilled as Xiaosu, and even disregarding that, what will happen to Fugi's son if he goes to the fortress? Xiaosu gets angry and says that Fugui may have a son, but Xiaosu has Liu Yuan and his sister Xiao Yu. Xiaosu makes it very clear to Fugui that if he dares to recommend Xiaosu to the army again, he will have Liu Yuan and Xiao Yu beat him up. Fugui is startled, but says he really did it thinking of Xiaosu's well-being. After all, if Fugui were 20 years younger, he really would have gone. Xiaosu shouts, asking if it's for his well-being. Then he will thank Fugui's entire family. Fugui responds that he will thank 8 generations of Xiaosu's ancestors. At that moment, the system notifies Xiaosu that he gained a gratitude point from Fugui. He is amazed at how easy it was to get that. Fugui is irritated, not understanding why Xiaosu is making that face. At that moment, they both turn immediately upon hearing a man shouting, asking what's happening and why they are grabbing him. The man in question is the one who visited Xiaosu's clinic. He is being taken away by the soldiers. Xiaosu observes this and asks what's happening. He wonders if the soldiers discovered the supernatural ability to explode bubbles that the man has. The army starts taking the man away, while he asks why he's being taken. The rest of the soldiers point their weapons at the other people, ordering them to step back. Fugui approaches the soldiers and asks what's going on. After all, although that man is a bit nasty, he hasn't committed any crime. The irritated soldier points his gun at Fugui's face and tells him to get lost. Fugui is frightened and runs to Xiaosu, wondering why they are arresting Baogen. Xiaosu is thoughtful, wondering if that arrest is indeed related to Baogen's supernatural power. Fugui lowers his head and says that Baogen is finished. There's nothing more to be done. Xiaosu asks why he is saying that. Fugui tells Xiaosu that he heard the night before that Baogen revealed he had a supernatural ability, but those fake friends apparently reported him. Fugui further explains that the fortress is relentlessly hunting people with supernatural abilities because they can pose a threat. Xiaosu is worried hearing all this. Fugui calms down a bit and asks Xiaosu what he would do if he were afraid of someone. Xiaosu, without thinking twice, responds that he would kill that person. Fugui disagrees with this answer, saying that it is not as simple as it seems. Fugui informs him that he has heard rumors that the fortress has established a psychiatric clinic inside solely to imprison people with supernatural abilities.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and like the video. Thank you.